Good evening, and welcome to tonight's event, Rediscovering Chinatown. I would first like to respectfully acknowledge the Silks Okanagan Nation and their peoples, in whose traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory UBC Okanagan is situated. I would also like to acknowledge that you are joining us today from many places near and far, and acknowledge the traditional owners and caretakers of those lands. My name is Ananya Mukherjee Reid, and I'm the Provost and Vice President Academic at UBC Okanagan. It is a pleasure to welcome you to tonight's event, which is part of a series of virtual events being held in recognition of Asian Heritage Month. The inspiration behind these events came from our students. In collaboration with both individual and community partners, like the Kelowna Museum Society, we are sharing the vibrant culture, history, and stories of Canadians of Asian descent. We know that Asian Heritage Month this time comes to us at an incredibly difficult moment for many Asian communities around the world. It is in the spirit of supporting one another and coming together that we welcome you to these events. It is now my pleasure to welcome the Honorable Ahmed Hussain, Minister of Families, Children and Social Development and Member of the Parliament of York South-Weston. Thank you so much for joining us, Minister Hussain. Over to you.
Thank you so much for having me, and I want to begin by also respectfully acknowledging that I am joining all of you from the city of Toronto on the traditional unceded territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. I'm obviously joining with all of you on Asian Heritage Month, which has been celebrated across Canada since the 1990s. In May 2002, the Government of Canada signed an official declaration to designate the month of May as Asian Heritage Month. And the theme for Asian Heritage Month in 2021 is recognition, resilience, and resolve. This theme speaks to the experience of people of Asian descent in Canada and honors their contributions and their diverse stories, which are rooted in resilience and perseverance. It's also a call to action for all Canadians to come together to fight against all forms of anti-Asian racism and discrimination. We need to raise awareness of the challenges faced by Asian Canadian communities across Canada and confront and denounce all forms of anti-Asian racism and discrimination. And it is our collective responsibility to step up, to speak up, to be strong allies, and to stand together against xenophobia, hate, and discrimination and racism, including anti-Asian racism. Our government is moving forward to strengthen our community's resolve to fight anti-Asian racism. Budget 2021 proposes to provide $11 million over 2 years, starting this year, to expand the impact of the Canadian Race Relations Foundation. And in part, this investment will facilitate initiatives like the establishment of a national coalition to support Asian Canadian communities and create a fund to support all racialized communities directly impacted by increasing acts of racism during the COVID-19 pandemic. This shows how Budget 2021 is focused on supporting Canadians through the COVID-19 pandemic. At the end of the day, our government believes very strongly that whenever a community is targeted, that we all have to stand up and speak very loudly and clearly and stand shoulder to shoulder with all Canadian communities from coast to coast to coast. And so it is my honor and pleasure to join you in this celebration and to, of course, recognize the challenging times that we're in, but know that your government, the government of Canada stands with you and will always support Asian Canadian communities right across the country. Merci beaucoup, tout le monde.
Thank you, Minister Hussain, for those inspiring words. I would now like to introduce today's event hosts, Jen Garner and Dr. Ying Zhu. Jen Garner is Head of Programming for Kelowna Museums. her anthropology degree from UBC Okanagan, and the experience teaching English overseas and in Kelowna combined to make education at the museum a perfect fit for her. Jen has been sharing her love of local history at the museum for 10 years. Joining Jen is Dr. Zhu, an assistant professor in the Faculty of Management at UBC Okanagan. She obtained her PhD in marketing from the Mays Business School at Texas A&M University. Dr. Zhu's primary research interest includes digital marketing, branding, consumer behavior, business analytics, and social networks. Over to you, Dr. Zhu.
Thank you so much for the warm introduction, Anania. I'm Ingju. I'm honored to host this event with Jen Garner from Kelowna Museum Society. Thank you so much for attending today's event. We're happy to celebrate the Asian Heritage Month together with you today. First, we want to take this opportunity to acknowledge the substantial contributions made by Asian communities to the city, the province, and the country. Through learning the history of Chinatown, we hope to build a more diversified and inclusive culture in UBC and in the Okanagan region. This event is a collaborative work of UBC and Kelowna Museum Society. This event will not be possible without the support of UBC students, alumni, and the museum staff. We are very grateful for the generosity of their time and effort. Let me give you a quick overview of today's event. First, we'll do some interactive exercise, so you will be actively involved in the event. And then Jen will give you more details about the virtual tour and show you a video about the Kelowna Chinatown. By the way, please pay close attention to the information in the video, because at the end of the video, we will ask you to answer some quiz questions. Okay, let's get started. First, I have some simple questions for you. You will see a pop-up screen on your Zoom with some questions. So please select the option that you think answers the question. The first question is, have you ever heard about Kelowna's Chinatown before this event? I lived in Kelowna for a long time, and I just learned about Chinatown not long ago. So I want to see how many people already heard about it. Wow, I'm very impressed. 61% of you already heard about the Kelowna Chinatown. That's fantastic. And that makes the second question much easier. So the second question is there currently a Chinatown in Kelowna? Do you think there's a physical Chinatown in Kelowna now? I think many of you know the correct answer. Oh, yes, 85% of you get the answer correct. So the correct answer is there is not a physical Chinatown in Kelowna now. That's a sad part of the history. You know, before 1970, there was a Chinatown in downtown Kelowna. Unfortunately, it was demolished after that. So today you will learn more about the history of Chinatown. If you live in the Okanagan area, I highly recommend you to check out the Okanagan Heritage Museum, because they still have a display of Chinese general store with items people salvaged from the original Chinatown. The museum is next to the Queensway bus loop and only half block away from the Kelowna Regional Library. I'm sure you will enjoy visiting the museum. Okay, I have one more question for you. You're doing great so far. So the third question is, When do you think the first baby of Chinese immigrants was born in Kelowna's Chinatown? So this is a challenging question. So if you don't know the answer, don't feel bad about it. Just guess, because I recently learned the fact, and of course I know the answer, but I just learned it recently. I am really impressed about your knowledge. 67% of you get the answer correct. 1906. So the first Chinese baby in Kelowna was born on February 2nd, 1906. And here's a fun fact. The baby's parents named her Kelowna Lee. Excellent work on answering these questions. Now I will hand it over to Jane and you will watch some videos. Again, pay attention to the information in the video because you will answer quiz questions. Okay, Jen, you can take it from here.
Thank you, Dr. Zhu, and those who spoke before me. Part of what we do here at the museum is collect and share stories of the people and place of the Okanagan. There are so many diverse stories to share, stories that teach us about the place where we live and how it came to be what it is today. Over the years, we've developed friendships and partnerships with so many people who join us for a cup of tea and tell us about their grandparents and their great-grandparents and how they came to the Okanagan and became a part of this community. Some of what you will hear tonight comes from these storytelling sessions. This video was a collaboration of many people. Something I am particularly grateful for is the contribution of the UBCO students who I had the pleasure of meeting, working with, and learning from. I value this experience and I thank you for teaching me about you and your cultures. We hope that you enjoy this video. Much of it is inside the Okanagan Heritage Museum, where I am right now. There are a few locations that you will see outside around Kelowna. And don't forget to watch closely. As Dr. Zhu mentioned, she is going to quiz you at the end. So let's sit back and enjoy the video. Kelowna's Chinatown was a neighborhood that was born out of discrimination and existed out of necessity. Although the physical neighborhood is no longer here, the legacy and contribution of the community members has had a lasting and positive impact on Kelowna. Chinese immigration to BC began during the 1858 gold rush. About 5,000 Chinese, mostly men, came either directly from China or via California. They were hoping to prosper here and to send money back home to their families in China to provide a better life for them. When the gold rush dried up, many of those men were hired as cheap labor to build the British Columbia section of the Canadian Pacific Railway. Between 1881 and 1884, about 15,000 Chinese men were hired. They were typically given the lowest wages for the most dangerous jobs in building that railway. Following the railway construction, some of those men moved to Vancouver or Victoria, but many of them stayed in the interior and they found jobs working on farms and orchards in the Okanagan. This began Kelowna's Chinatown. Officially established in 1905, the same year that Kelowna became incorporated as a city, Chinatown was a place within a place. The Chinese were not welcome into the broader, very British community of Kelowna, and that's why this neighborhood existed and why it was necessary for them. Chinatown bordered City Park to the west, along where Abbott Street is today. It was mainly between Leon and Harvey, which is now the highway. The height of the population of Kelowna's Chinatown, there are about 500 people living in those couple city blocks.
这栋现存于奥肯纳根遗产博物馆内的木屋建于1860年，也正是华人开始在奥肯纳根发迹的时期。 这块位于基洛纳市中心拉扬和阿伯特街路口的路牌是极少数现存的，见证华人社区存在过的实证之一。曾经的城市公园咖啡馆就坐落在街对面。咖啡馆和洗衣店是当时为数不多的允许华人经营的生意，而这家咖啡馆是极少数由华人经营的生意中非华人经常光顾的店铺之一。咖啡馆的老板邝先生在唐人街和基洛纳的大社区中都是一位知名的、备受尊敬的商人。在华人广泛受到歧视的大环境下，邝先生仍旧成功经营着城市公园咖啡馆，这是非同凡响的。他的咖啡馆成为了社区的交流中心，邝先生也被公认为是社区的中流砥柱。
这家设立在奥肯纳根遗产博物馆的中式杂货店里，保存了不少基洛纳唐人街拆除后挽救和获赠的物品。我们在橱窗里看到的许多物品，在当时的华人商店普遍出售，但在唐人街以外的地方却不常见。基洛纳的白人社区认为唐人街神秘而富有异国情调，所以唐人街发生的事常在口口相传间变成都市传说。唐人街曾是被隔离的社区，除了往返于农场和果园的工作外，大多数华人都待在唐人街被非官方划分的边界内。这些中式商店为唐人街的居民提供了生活所用的必需品。唐人街的存在也为社区居民们提供了急需的友情。大多数唐人街的居民都是男性，而他们的妻子儿女都留在中国。为了排解寂寞，男人们经常聚在一起打骨牌、麻将或赌翻摊。据推测，博物馆展出的这只金色野鸡与马乔有关。马乔于1927年来到基洛纳，在伯纳德大道上开了一家名为金鸡咖啡馆的餐厅。在20世纪30年代的经济大萧条期间，马乔白天在他的餐厅正常供应餐点，晚上则在后门开设施食处。无论是否负担得起，每个人都能在马乔的金鸡咖啡馆填饱肚子。马乔退休后搬到了基洛纳西岸，他种植的芦笋和剑兰因为优秀的品质而闻名社区。由于他为社區的卓越贡献，一所基洛纳西岸的小學以他而命名。
對於喺唐人街嘅男性嚟講，書信係唯一同喺中國嘅屋企人溝通嘅方法。信件派遞當年往往需要幾個月橫渡太平洋抵達中國。以呢一封從基隆拿公共資料館嘅信件為例，啟濤我軍傳啟者，重陽遠隔，久闊清層，近節難逢我路河。如傾接來使並銀50元，我豈要3000也。閱信之後真令我傷心難言，封傳我語請君勿信。君離家鄉已過旬年，與君未來望眼將穿，雁書難傳，唯有默祝你身體康強，諸事如意。銀兩多寄則家庭之幸福日進於隆也。自你父親逝世之後，家中一概事務幸得大難節儉維持，方無提機之累也。兒子年幼，正是求學之時，你須多寄銀兩回家，以預不時之需。如然後陳尊此，遙祝安康。何氏之基，中華民國28年12月初10日，西曆1939年1月29日。呢一類書信中有一個共同主題，勸服前往家國嘅屋企人，佢哋情況良好，但係佢哋亦同時請求對方，甚至迫切地要求寄錢返屋企。即使少數華人生意，譬如城市公園餐廳同金雞餐廳，受廣大基隆拿居民歡迎，當地同加拿大華人仍受廣泛歧視。1895年加拿大太平洋鐵路完工後，加國政府向華人實施人頭稅，以遏止佢哋嘅移民進入境內。呢個係加拿大史上第一次以種族背景為由立法禁止移民。人頭稅喺1895年為每人50加幣， 後來喺1900年上升到100加幣，1903年更加上升至500加幣。因為人頭稅嘅徵收，大多數在家勞動嘅男人唔可以俾妻兒子女進入加拿大，所以基隆拿唐人街人口開始下降。我哋從西爾克斯族嘅鄰居同合作夥伴得知，原居民對進出基隆拿唐人街並同當時嘅華人建立咗商業同貿易關係而感到自在。正因為原居民同華人為受邊緣嘅社群，所以佢哋互相抱有好感，而建立咗互相融洽嘅關係。
One of the features of early Kelowna was an opera house that stood about where Blend's coffee shop is on Bernard Avenue today. The opera house was on the ground floor, and the Raymer family lived up on the second floor. One night, late October 1916, the opera house was on fire. By the time the family woke up and realized it was too late for them to get downstairs, so they sent their son Willie up to the roof of the building to call for help. Now, even though the fire hall is just down the street, you can see the red roof right there, it wasn't actually the fire department that first heard the calls for help. It was members of Kelowna's Chinatown, which was just behind this building. The Chinese people that heard the calls for help, they set up some ladders and they got this family safely off the roof of the building. The next day in the newspaper, there was an extensive story about the fire. It talked about the family who was all safe. It talked about the damage to the opera house. It talked about the damage to the adjoining buildings. It even mentioned the British man who gave the family a cup of tea afterwards. Now, the Chinese people, the ones who actually got the family off the roof of the burning building, they were reduced to one line in the newspaper, and it simply said, "Some Chinese aided the family." And this story is just one example of how Chinese people were thought about and treated in Kelowna. Approximately 82,000 Chinese immigrants paid the head tax between 1885 and 1923. This tax targeted Chinese only and was the first legislation in Canada to exclude immigration based on ethnic background. The head tax, as well as other anti-Chinese laws and legislation, affected Chinese families and society. In 2006, Prime Minister Stephen Harper formally apologized for the head tax. In 2014, BC Premier Christy Clark apologized on behalf of British Columbia. A Chinese-Canadian man in Kelowna who received reparations from his great-grandfather's head tax payment used the money to pay for this monument. It includes the words of the government apology and sits in a local cemetery where many Chinese are buried. It was the first of its kind in British Columbia. Kelowna's Chinatown was made up of mostly men and a few women who brought with them language, culture, determination, and a strong work ethic. They were here to provide a better life for their families back in China, and many of them were never able to see their families again. This historic neighborhood played a vital role in their lives here, and also played a vital role in the Kelowna that we have today. There is still one family in Kelowna with ties back to the original Chinatown. Today's Kelowna is made up of people from many different ethnic backgrounds. Each of these people bring their culture, their stories, and add to the vibrancy that makes up our city. When we learn about the past, we learn about the racism that existed. Sadly, much of this racism still exists today. So in honor of Asian Heritage Month, we celebrate the positive cultural impact that many people have contributed to our community.
於呢一次為基隆拿唐人街歷史嘅翻譯，可以話係一個增廣見聞同認識基隆拿地區歷史嘅經歷。喺基隆拿留學同生活咗接近5年，我從來未聽過基隆拿市曾經有唐人街嘅存在，直至非常近期先至知道。對於我嚟講，唐人街係陌生但又熟悉嘅地方， 佢又令我諗起屋企嘅事物，譬如茶餐廳，一種港式餐廳、繁體字等等。但係同時嗰度地方嘅人同事有一種難說嘅隔膜。基隆那嘅唐人街見證咗20世紀初華人移民其中嘅種種經歷。因為清末民初嘅政治動盪同時代嘅更替，大量基隆那嘅華人移民海外去呢一度尋覓機會。從基隆那唐人街嘅文物與技術，亦都記錄咗華人曾生活於基隆那嘅事蹟。雖然呢一類歷史睇嚟好似遙遠，但其實佢係不斷相隨嘅。
Now you watch the video. I hope you learn a lot about Kelowna's Chinatown. It's emotional to watch this video and learn about the discrimination towards the Chinese community in Kelowna's history. It's also sad to know the racism still exists today. But like Jen mentioned, we want to celebrate the positive impact made by the Chinese community while learning the hurtful truths from the past. Okay, remember we mentioned there will be a few quiz questions for you at the end of the video. So now let's get into those questions. The first question is, around what time did Chinese immigrants begin to come to the Okanagan? This information is at the beginning of the video. So if you pay attention, you probably know the answer. Even you don't, trying to guess. We're just trying to get you involved. Is it 1960? Is it 1760? Is it 1860? Wow, this is so impressive. 94% of you get the answer correct. You definitely paid attention. Thank you for the correct answer. So as you realized, the first group of Chinese immigrants came to this region in 1860. So let's get into the second question, which is, who has a school named after him in West Kelowna because of his remarkable service to the community? I know this question may be a little bit challenging because 2 out of the 3 names have appeared in the video. So if you pay attention, you probably know the correct answer. I'm sure the majority will get the answer right. Like I predicted, excellent. 72% of you get the correct answer. It's a Mar Jock. So if you, in the video, it clearly mentioned Mar Jock had operated the cafe. He served the regular food to the customers during the day, but he also offered food to people who cannot afford it at night. So if you answered A, don't feel too bad because you're very close to the correct answer, because in the video, it does mention Mr. Kwang, and Mr. Kwang was the owner of the City Park Cafe. He also made a significant contribution to the Kelowna community. So great job. Okay, we have one more question. Which group of people felt comfortable going into Kelowna's Chinatown and did business and trade with people there? This information appeared towards the end of the video. I'm still confident majority will get this answer correct. Let's see. Wow, this even better than the last one. 86% of you answered correctly. It's indigenous people. So from the video, we learned the racial discrimination towards the Chinese community in Kelowna started a century ago, because both Chinese and indigenous communities faced similar discrimination. They formed long-lasting friendships. By learning the dark history from the past, we hope the same mistakes won't be repeated in the future. Let's fight anti-Asian racism together and build a more inclusive and diversified community for all of us. Let's support each other and cherish each other's achievement and contributions to society. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'm really impressed about your learning capability and your memory. And thank you so much for your active interaction. I will hand it over to Jen for more information.
Thank you again, Dr. Zhu, for the fun trivia and the great message. At this point in the evening, I would like to invite you to use the Q&A box on the bottom of your screen if you have any questions that you would like to ask. While you are formulating and typing those questions, I'm going to share an additional story with you. That object that I just showed you is connected to a person whose story I love to share because she teaches us lessons of perseverance and generosity. While I'm telling you about this formidable woman, see if you can guess and figure out what that object is. Here it is again. Su Liping Wang was born in the province of Canton, China in 1911. As a young girl, she moved to Vancouver, and out of necessity, she became a child servant for a family there. Su Liping Wang married a man named Wang Bat around 1930 and moved to Kelowna, where her husband owned a Chinese general store. She was possibly the only woman in Kelowna's Chinatown at that time. They had 2 daughters together. I'd like to share with you this photo of Su Liping Wang and 2 daughters, Milan and Mei King. Now, her husband tragically died in 1932, and Sue was left with a business that she did not know how to run, almost no English, and daughters to raise. She persevered through some very tough times. Sue remarried in 1937 a man named Wang Ying. They had 9 children together. So that makes a total of, that's right, 11 children. And that family of 13 lived in Kelowna's Chinatown on Leon Avenue in a 700 square foot home with 1 bedroom that they all shared. And for all of you students who are on our webinar right now, that's way more crowded than your dorm rooms. All of Sue's children were born in the home. She couldn't afford to go to the hospital. And she said, quote, "Giving birth wasn't really a big deal." Pretty amazing, right? When her second husband died in 1960, Sue once again found herself faced with supporting her family alone, this time with 7 of her children still in school. She refused to let any of them drop out of school and get a job to help. Her children were going to have an education that she was always denied. So, how did she support her large family? Well, she made something and she sold it. She was the only person around who made this thing. What is it that she made? We're going to have you guess by Zoom poll. Su Liping Wang sold pork dumplings, tea, tofu, or dyed linen cloth? We'll give you a chance to guess your answer. Okay, so what have we got here? So we have almost half of you guessed tofu and then a couple guesses for the other options. Great job. You're doing really well with the Zoom polls this evening. You're right, she sold tofu. And this object that I showed you was the big hint at the beginning. That, which is on display in the Okanagan Heritage Museum, is Su Li Ping Wang's tofu maker. She had it sent all the way over from China. As I said, she was the only person who made tofu in the area. And when you see the tofu maker, you can understand why she was the only one who had one brought over from China. I don't know how much it weighs, but I think it's a lot. People remember Su Li Ping Wang as a tiny woman, full of smiles, who probably understood more English than she let on. She helped out anyone in need with a hot meal, a small loan, or a home remedy for any kind of ailment. Su Li Ping Wang, a resident from Kelowna's Chinatown, is a part of our history. Okay, and I see that we have a couple questions in here. So I'm going to go ahead and go into the Q&A here. And I would like to say I am far from an expert. I will do my very best to answer your questions. And if there are questions that I'm unable to answer, I can always send out my email and talk and connect with you later with some answers. Okay, so we have a question here. Why did Chinatown disappear? Okay, fantastic question. So there are a couple different reasons why Chinatown disappeared. With the anti-Chinese laws and legislation, fewer Chinese people were coming over and very few women. So in a community or a family in China, generally it was the husband or a strong young man that they sent over, and the women weren't able to come over because of the head tax. So of course, when you have a community with very few women, you get very few children. In the early 1970s, the last couple of residents from Kelowna's Chinatown moved to Vancouver, where there was a bigger Chinese population there, and Chinatown was physically bulldozed, so nothing was actually left of it after that. Today, if you go down to City Park on Abbott Street, you can find there are a couple of signs with some information that you can go and learn a little bit more about Chinatown. Okay, thanks for that question. Okay. How can we help those who are currently growing up in the region learn about this important story? Okay, fantastic question, and thanks for answering that, or sorry, for asking that. So a couple of different places that I can recommend that you learn more about this story. You can certainly come into the Okanagan Heritage Museum, where I am right now, just downtown beside the Queensway bus loop. And we have some of the story here. There's also a really great resource online. It's called the Okanagan Historical Society Reports. And they have been publishing, that society has been publishing a book on Kelowna's history every year since, I think the first year was 1926. And you can do a keyword search and get some really good information. And the story that I shared with you tonight of Su Li Ping Wang, a lot of that story, I got that information from the Okanagan Historical Society reports. Okay, thanks for that question. Okay, and why was Chinatown destroyed in the 1970s? So I talked a little bit about, the last couple people moving away when the population of Chinatown dwindled down to just a few people. And then it was destroyed. I believe it was because where the land was, it was right downtown, valuable land. And so the last couple of buildings were destroyed, and then they started building, cement and brick buildings, mainly down Leon Avenue. Okay. All right. Wow, the questions are coming in hot. I'm gonna try to get to a few more here. What is the current population of Asians in Kelowna? Fantastic question. I don't know the answer to that. And we have a few other panelists on here. If any of you are able to speak to that, please feel free to unmute and help answer that question.
I just Googled it. I look at the overall population of Kelowna from the Canadian government website. It's about 151,000, and the Google shows the minority is 6%. So that's roughly the Asian population, probably less than 10,000 at the most, probably even lesser than that. I hope that gave us a rough idea.
Thank you. Okay, that helps. Okay, so we have some more questions here. How can we learn more about the relationship between the Indigenous people and the Chinese people in Kelowna? Okay, another fantastic question. I don't have a ton of information on this. And what I can share with you, what you saw in the video when we talked about the idea that the Syilx people here, being another marginalized community, felt comfortable going into Chinatown. That was some information that was shared with us with some of the Syilx partners that we work with here at the museum. And to dig a little bit deeper into that story, I would suggest a couple things. I would suggest visiting the Sensuips Heritage Museum, which is just across the bridge on the west side. I do believe that they are still closed because of COVID. So check their website and see if they're open before you go and visit there. I would also suggest, to learn more about that, look online. There are lots of different workshops and webinars that many different people from the Syilx Nation are putting on, and you can join these workshops and webinars. There are places there where you can ask questions to a Syilx person who might be able to share a little bit more about that story. Okay. So what are your recommendations to look into Kelowna's historical Chinatown? So I mentioned that the Okanagan Historical Society reports are a great resource. The museum is a great resource. The Kelowna Public Archives, which is in the basement of the Okanagan Heritage Museum, is a fantastic resource for this. In the archives, we have these amazing letters. You heard a sample of one of the letters tonight in that video, but there are amazing letters back and forth between men who were living in Kelowna's Chinatown and their families. And it really gives a lot of insight about how some of these people were feeling and how they were thinking. So especially if you are wanting to dig deeper into this research, then I would really suggest calling the museum and making an appointment with the Kelowna Public Archives. Okay. Did any of the Chinese men marry non-Chinese women? Do you know, I don't know about that. Once again, I'd like to invite, if any, just in the readings and the research I've done, I haven't come across that information. Or I'll wait just a moment and again see if any of our other panelists might know more than I about that.
Hi, Jen. This is Linda Digby. I'm the. Can you hear me? Okay. I'm the executive director of Kelowna Museum Society, and I'm so enjoying this evening. I like Jen, I have to say I'm very curious about that topic too, and I haven't run into any reference to that. What we hear so much from the research that has been done is that they were really, for the most part, what has been called married bachelors. You know, most of them had wives and families back home in China, and their whole purpose was to try and support them. Also, given their marginalized position in society, you know, there wouldn't have been a lot of options for them in that way. So of course, there's going to be an exception to the rule out there somewhere, but we certainly haven't encountered that in our experience so far. Great question.
Thank you. And Linda, don't go too far away. Our next question here says, does Vernon have a Chinatown? And I don't believe it does. Somebody please correct me if I'm wrong. I do know that Penticton had a Chinatown. I don't know about Vernon. Okay, I'll move on, and if somebody jumps in and corrects me on that, you say, please go ahead. How did Kelowna come to be called? And I'm sorry, I don't read Chinese, so I'm not quite sure what is written there. Dr. Zhu, can you see that?
Yes, I saw the question. That's a good question. So the one you put in your answer, it's Jiluona. It's a simplified Chinese, and the translation is we call it the phonetic translation. It's a literal translation. So the three words put together, the way it is because Kelowna and Jiluona. So if you see the similarity, it's based on the pronunciation. So in Chinese character, we found the three characters that have the similar pronunciation as Kelowna. So to further answer your question, Cantonese, there's a little bit history because majority of North American people think Chinese people speak Cantonese. The reason is early on, all the Chinese immigrants are from the province called Canton. So they immigrant to Canada, to US, they set up Chinatown stores and restaurants. So the North American people first exposed to this group of immigrants who only speak Cantonese. So now Cantonese is the regional language spoken by people who live in Canton. Canton is one of the 31 provinces in China, and also spoken by people in Hong Kong. So in today's video, you're very lucky to hear both the Mandarin version and the Cantonese version. So people live in Canton, China, mainland China. They speak Cantonese, but they use simplified Chinese because that's what the official language in mainland China. Hong Kong people use traditional Chinese. So the translation, you know, if anyone do cultural research, you know, there's many times the same word may be translated into different versions. So in Cantonese, if people choose to use traditional Chinese, they may or may not have the identical translation as simplified Chinese. Hokkien, it's a dialect. So people live in that region, it's because that region is in mainland China, and the Hokkien is just a dialect. So people speak that dialect, they use simplified Chinese as a written language. I hope I didn't make this more complicated. I hope I answered your question.
Thanks for helping me out with that.
No problem.
I do see that we have a comment that Vernon did have a large Chinatown. So thank you for adding that and I'm going to go learn about it. That's a great reason for me to go and learn something new. So thanks for adding that to our question and answer. I see here that, why couldn't they keep even some of Chinatown for historic reasons? And, I think that's a really fantastic point. And I do hope, and I know that today we think a lot more deeply about some of the different cultures that are represented here and how they add so much to our community. I do want to show you, I'll try to give you a view of this building that's behind me here inside the museum. Okay. So this building is made up of some buildings from Kelowna's Chinatown. So you can come and visit this in the museum. Okay. And I have a really nice comment here. I read the letter that was in the video. It was intimate and emotional. The words were emotionally expressive, and I was moved when reading the letter's comments. Thank you for sharing that with the group. And I said, anybody who really wants to learn more, I invite you to come to the museum, and we have several letters that you can read, and it really will give you more of an insight to how people were feeling and thinking and emotionally dealing with the situation that they were in, which is being far away from their families. Okay, we have some other great comments coming in here. The Chinese community is diverse, and particularly so in Canada, with various dialects as well. Thanks for sharing that. And oh, I love this. Larry Kwong was the first non-white and Asian descent player in the NHL in 1948. He was born and raised in Vernon. Thank you, Richard, for sharing that. That is an awesome, fascinating fact from the Okanagan. And he remembers watching Chinatown being demolished. Wow, that must have been quite the thing to see. Thank you for all of that you're sharing. And I think because of timing, this might be our last question here. Is the Chinatown exhibit at the museum permanent? It is. Yes, it is part of our permanent galleries. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for all of that you asked and shared and participated in. We really appreciate that. To everyone who worked on this project, I would like to say a heartfelt thank you to your energy, expertise, and passion. Tonight, we do have some of our lead program partners who you will see in a moment. Linda Digby, who helped me answer questions, is the executive director of the Kelowna Museum Society. And you will also see Dr. Hussein Kashani from the University of British Columbia, Okanagan. To our audience tonight, I hope we have given you a taste of the rich culture and heritage in our city. So visit the museums, go to heritage sites, and continue exploring. Xie xie.